Hello everyone. Welcome to this unit's discussion on Introduction to Contracts. A contract is an agreement, but is it a legally enforceable agreement? Let us explore this further. The four main elements of a valid contract are offer, acceptance, consideration, and legal capacity. If we go into a more detailed analysis of what constitutes a valid contract, some may even add the element intent to create legal relations. Intent to create legal relations simply means that the contract does not exist simply because there is an agreement between people. The parties to the agreement must intend to enter into a legally binding agreement. As implied in this discussion, you will note that this will rarely be stated explicitly, but will usually be able to be inferred from the circumstances in which the agreement was made. For example, offering a friend a ride in your car is not usually intended to create a legally binding relation. You may, however, have agreed with your friend to share the cost of traveling to work on a regular basis and agree that each Friday your friend will pay you $20 for the running cost of the car. Here, the law is more likely to recognize that a contract was entered into. So what constitutes an offer? The first element in a valid contract would be an offer. An offer or a promise or an agreement needs to be in contract because if there is no offer, then there will be no contract. Following an offer should be acceptance. Acceptance occurs when the party answering the offer agrees to the offer by way of a statement or an act. Consideration is the price paid for the promise of the other party. The price may be something of value, although it need not be money. Legal capacity in a contract ensures that the parties to the contract have the legal capacity to do so. 18 years old is considered the age of majority. Minors, those persons below the age of 18, have no capacity to enter into contracts. Also, insane people or people with unsound minds and/or mental impairment also cannot enter into any valid contracts. For example, a 15-year-old could not stay in a hotel since that person has not reached the age of majority and therefore has no ability to enter into a contract. There are two types of contract: a unilateral contract and a bilateral contract. The essential difference between the two is in the parties. The unilateral contracts involved only promisor, while the bilateral contracts involves both a promisor and a promisee. In a unilateral contract, only one party to the contract makes a promise. A typical example is the reward contract. Johnny promises to pay a reward to Yvonne if Yvonne finds Johnny's dog. Yvonne is not obliged to find Johnny's dog, but Johnny is obliged to pay the reward to Yvonne if she finds the dog. In this example, the finding of the dog is a condition precedent to Johnny's obligation to pay. An offer of a unilateral contract may often be made to many people or to the world by means of an advertisement. In that situation, acceptance will only occur on satisfaction of the conditions, such as finding of the offerer's dog. If the condition is something that only one party can perform, both the offerer and the offeree are protected. The offerer is protected because he will only ever be contractually obliged to one of the many offerees, and the offeree is protected because if she does not perform the condition, the offerer will be contractually obliged to pay her. In unilateral contracts, the requirement that acceptance be communicated to the offerer is waived. The offerer accepts by performing the condition, and the offerer's performance is also treated as the price or consideration for the offerer's promise. The most common type of unilateral contract is the insurance contract. The insurance company promises to pay the insured a stated amount of money on the happening of an event if the insured pays premiums. Note that the insured does not make any promises to pay the premiums. A bilateral contract is a reciprocal arrangement between two parties where each promises to perform an act in exchange for the other party's act. A bilateral contract specifies a duty to act in exchange for another party's duty to act. An example of a bilateral contract would be the contract for the sale of a home. A home buyer agrees to pay the seller a certain amount of money in exchange for the title to the home. The home seller agrees to deliver the title in exchange for the specified sales price. When the contract is not fulfilled, there is a breach of contract. You will also hear about express and implied contracts. An express contract is a contract whose terms are fully stated, while an implied contract is a contract whose terms are inferred from the parties. Let us discuss express contracts by way of example. Yvonne wants to purchase her first home. She found the perfect place in Atlanta. The contract for purchase was signed, and she closed on the home within a month. The contract Yvonne entered into is an express contract because the elements are specifically stated, including offer, acceptance, and consideration. To break it down, this contract contained 6 elements: an offer, acceptance of the offer, consideration, mutual assent, capacity, and legally accepted terms. This is pretty straightforward. Yvonne searched for a home, found the perfect place, and accepted the seller's offer to purchase. Once Yvonne did that, she had to come up with the money to purchase the home. Both parties agreed to the terms and are of age and mental capacity to enter into the contract, and there was nothing illegal about the sale. Yvonne is now a happy homeowner. But not every contract works that way. In fact, some contracts are not written or expressed. They just happen because of circumstances. This sounds counterintuitive, I know. An implied contract works differently. This type of contract evolves When no written contract is present, but circumstances may cause one person to become unjustly enriched as a result of their actions, or an understanding exists. There are two types of implied contracts: implied in fact and implied in law. An example of each will help to explain the conditions necessary for each type of contract. When you arrive at the barber for your usual cut, it is expected that you will pay for the services rendered. That is an implied in fact contract. The common understanding based on the conduct of the parties serves as a contract to pay for your new due. Implied in law contracts work a bit differently. In fact, they are really not contracts at all. That is why the law gives them a clever name like quasi-contracts. This is because the court determines whether this type of contract existed after performance or non-performance as a means to determine whether one party can collect restitution for a service they performed. For example, let us assume you choked on a fishbone at Fishbone. Lucky for you, Dr. Brown was there having his usual snapper meal. Dr. Brown performed the Heimlich maneuver to dislodge the obstruction and handed you a bill for his services. You may refuse to pay because you did not solicit his services, but you wouldn't get very far. The law will look at whether you were unjustly enriched by accepting his services to clear your throat. And this occurs when one party receives something of value from another unfairly, like receiving free medical treatment to save your life. This is the end of this presentation on our introduction to contracts. We will continue with a discussion of contracts next week. Thank you for listening.